ID started to notice a pattern. Final part. I stared at her, utterly speechless. You did what? Clara grabbed my forearm, squeezing it tightly. He wants to see you in his office right now. Please, Gwen, just take the fall for this one time. I'll buy you dinner, I promise. My cubicle neighbor, Zoe, nudged my foot under the desk, shooting me a warning look. But seeing Clara's frantic state, and knowing the power dynamic, I let out a tired sigh and nodded. Fine. Oh, thank you so much, Gwen. Her tears vanished instantly. She spun on her heel, her perfectly curled hair bouncing as she practically skipped away. Zoe gave me a look of pure sympathy. She's the boss's girl, she whispered. We can't win. Good luck, Gwen. Fight hard. Bracing myself for the worst, I marched toward the lion's den. Zachary's office was decorated in stark, oppressive shades of charcoal and slate, designed to make visitors feel small. He sat behind his massive desk, radiating a cold, lethal aura. He didn't even bother to look up when the door clicked shut. Took you long enough. Are you physically incapable of walking at a normal pace? Just pretend he's yelling at Clara, I chanted silently to myself. It's fine. How long have you been with this company? Zachary asked, his voice sharp with irritation. 5 years, I stammered, hating how small I sounded. 5 years? And you present this utter garbage? He picked up the heavy binder and tossed it. It skittered across the polished floor, stopping right at my feet. I bent down to retrieve it, and as I stood up, my eyes met his. His gaze was icy, razor sharp, and entirely unyielding. 5 years of experience, and you make a rookie mistake like this? Do you honestly believe you're still an asset to this department? Terrified and utterly overwhelmed, my brain short-circuited. Yes, sir, you're right. I'm an idiot. Simon slipped into the office carrying a stack of folders. He took one look at my pale face and frowned slightly. The second half of this report is acceptable, Zachary continued, relentless in his criticism. But the beginning is a complete disaster. If you don't want to do your job, Gwen, let me know. Actually, sir, Gwen is one of our most reliable seniors. This seems unlike her, Simon interjected gently, trying to throw me a lifeline. Wasn't this a joint project with Clara? Zachary glared at his assistant as if Simon had suddenly grown a second head. My eyes drifted to the desk, landing on the fountain pen gripped in Zachary's hand. A jolt went through me. It was incredibly familiar, nearly identical to the vintage pen I'd bought for my text-boyfriend. I'd spent hours hunting it down in an antique shop, and the owner had sworn it was a one-of-a-kind piece. Before my rational mind could stop me, the words slipped out. Does that pen write well? Zachary's expression hardened even further. Mind your own business, Gwen. He snapped the file closed. You're working overtime tonight. Don't even think about leaving until this is fixed. When Zachary gave an order, there was no negotiating. Clara was nowhere to be found for the rest of the afternoon. With no other choice, I sat down and began rebuilding her half of the project from scratch, scraping databases, cross-referencing figures, and pulling new charts. By the time the rest of the office packed up and left, I was still buried under a mountain of papers. I ordered a lukewarm black coffee, too exhausted to even think about dinner. The open plan office was pitch black, save for the solitary glow of my monitor. I rubbed a few drops of peppermint essential oil onto my temples, hoping the sharp scent would stave off the pounding headache. Once the revision was complete, I carried the binder back to Zachary's office. He hadn't left either, still buried under his own mountain of executive paperwork. As I approached his desk, he suddenly stopped writing and looked up, his nose wrinkling. What is that smell? Peppermint oil, I mumbled, rubbing my neck. I was getting a headache. I don't like it, he said, his brow furrowing. It has a, he trailed off, searching for the word, a medicinal, apothecary smell, I supplied automatically. The phrase slipped out before I could stop it. My text-boyfriend had used those exact words once when I told him about my favorite oil. Zachary froze, his hands suspended in midair. He stared at me, a sudden, intense confusion flashing in his dark eyes. He rubbed his temples, his gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Where did you hear that phrase? He demanded, his voice dropping an octave. Before I could answer, the door burst open. Babe, you must be exhausted. I brought you. Clara froze when she saw me standing there. She was weighed down with glossy shopping bags from Saks and Chanel, so that was where her urgent client meeting had taken her. Oh, Gwen, you're still here, she said, her voice dropping the high-pitched baby tone. No thanks to you, I thought. Zachary skimmed the revised pages of my report, his expression unreadable. This is acceptable. It's late. Go home. I turned to leave, but as the door swung shut behind me, I caught the low murmur of Clara's voice. What were you two talking about just now? I was too tired to notice the sharp, calculating look she threw at my back. The next day at lunch, Zoe slid into the booth across from me, looking like a spy on a covert mission. She glanced left and right before leaning over the table. Gwen, there's a rumor spreading. People are saying you stayed late last night specifically to try and make a move on Mr. Harley. I choked on my salad, coughing into a napkin. What? Who said that? It's all over the group chats. I know it's garbage, obviously, but still, only Clara and I had been there last night. Why would she spin a lie like that? Shaking it off, I tried to focus on my work. Later that afternoon, I walked up to the executive suite to turn in the final contract specs. The heavy wooden door to Zachary's office wasn't fully closed, and Clara's voice drifted out into the hallway. Babe, you've heard the rumors, she was saying, her voice a soft, dramatic purr. Honestly, I think letting Gwen go might be the best way to protect her reputation. And yours. She's been with the firm for 5 years, Clara, Zachary replied, sounding exhausted. I can't just fire her without cause, but her work has been so sloppy lately. Most of the project we just turned in was actually done by me. If she leaves, it clears up the gossip and we don't have to worry about her bringing down the team's metrics. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I walked back to my desk and quietly began packing my personal things into a cardboard box. 10 minutes later, an email from HR landed in my inbox. Termination of contract. Gwen, can you take a look at these client files? Our department director asked, dropping a folder on my desk, entirely unaware of what had just happened. I smiled politely and took the folder. I wanted to finish my final day with my head held high, even if leaving the place I'd dedicated 5 years of my life to left a bitter taste in my mouth. By the time I finished wrapping up the files, it was nearly 8 in the evening. I carried my box of belongings out of the building and headed toward the subway. My apartment was in a quieter, slightly older neighborhood, and due to ongoing road construction, my usual shortcut was blocked. I had to take a detour, turning my 10-minute walk into a dark, 30-minute trek. The street lamps were sparse, casting long, shivering shadows on the pavement. A prickle of dread crawled up my spine. Footsteps. I glanced back. A dark silhouette quickly melted into the shadow of an alleyway. My heart hammered against my ribs, my knees turning to jelly. Trembling, I pulled out my phone and went to my contacts. At the very top of my list was the phone number my text-boyfriend had given me. If you're ever in trouble, he'd written months ago, call this. I don't care what time it is. I'll find you. With no other options, I pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice picked up, cold, sharp, and distinctly not my ex-boyfriend's. Gwen, I froze. That voice came from behind me, not through the speaker. Slowly, I turned. Zachary Harley stood 10 feet away, phone pressed to his ear, his expression unreadable. The street lamp cast harsh shadows across his angular jaw. You? I whispered, lowering my phone. Why do you have? Hang up and come here, he said flatly. Unless you want to keep running from whoever's following you. I scrambled toward him, clutching my box of belongings like a shield. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the narrow alley beside him, pressing me against the cold brick wall. His body blocked me completely. Don't move, he breathed. I could hear the footsteps approaching, slower now, hesitant. Then a man's gruff voice muttered, lost her, before retreating. Zachary didn't let go. His eyes bore into mine, dark and intense. That pen you gave Clara, the one you bought for your text-boyfriend, you found it in an antique shop on Maple Street, didn't you? The owner told you it was one of a kind. My blood ran cold. How do you know that? Because I bought its pair 3 years ago, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And I've been waiting ever since for the woman who bought the other one to call that number. I stared at him, my mind reeling. You're the wrong number? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver pen, identical to the one I'd given Clara. I was going to tell you tonight, he said quietly, until I heard Clara telling me to fire you. From the end of the alley, a figure appeared. Clara, she smiled, slow and venomous. Well, took you long enough to figure it out, boss. Too bad you fired her first.